It began with a quiet disclosure from a palace insider, one that was never expected to leave royal circles, but within days, commentators were revisiting decades of royal history. According to reports, Queen Camilla had long believed a prestigious royal estate might eventually become part of her family's future. Yet a decision reportedly made years earlier by the Queen Mother had already changed that outcome, creating a mystery that continues to fuel speculation today. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the revelations seemed almost insignificant. Royal inheritance stories emerge frequently, often generating brief curiosity before disappearing beneath the weight of newer headlines. Yet this story refused to fade. The reason was simple. It involved not only a historic royal estate but also two powerful figures whose influence continues to shape conversations about the monarchy long after the decisions themselves were reportedly made. On one side stood Queen Camilla, whose position within the royal family has always attracted intense scrutiny. On the other stood the Queen Mother, a figure remembered for her deep understanding of royal continuity and her unwavering commitment to protecting what she believed belonged to the institution rather than the individual. As reports circulated, royal commentators began revisiting old accounts, forgotten interviews, and long-discussed palace rumors. According to various interpretations, Camilla allegedly believed that changing family circumstances might eventually place the estate within reach. Whether that expectation was based on private conversations, assumptions, or simple speculation remains unclear. Yet what fascinated observers was the suggestion that the outcome had reportedly been determined years earlier, through decisions made quietly and deliberately behind palace walls. The estate itself soon became the focus of growing attention. Palace insiders described it as far more than a valuable piece of land. To many observers, it represented continuity, history, and a direct connection to generations of royal stewardship. Certain properties within the monarchy carry symbolic importance that extends far beyond their financial worth. They become woven into the identity of the institution itself. That reality made any discussion about future ownership exceptionally sensitive. What transformed the story from a simple inheritance rumor into a royal mystery was the reported role played by the Queen Mother. According to commentators, she may have anticipated future disputes surrounding key royal assets, long before they ever emerged publicly. If those accounts are accurate, her alleged decision was not merely administrative, it was strategic. Observers increasingly began to wonder whether she had quietly established protections designed to preserve particular estates for specific purposes, or future generations. The more people examined the story, the more questions surfaced. Why was this estate considered so important? What made it different from other royal properties? And why did reports suggest that expectations and reality ultimately moved in completely different directions? No official answers emerged. Instead, the controversy survived through speculation, insider accounts, and competing interpretations that seemed to raise more questions than they resolved. That uncertainty only strengthened public fascination. Every discussion about the estate eventually led back to the same underlying issue. This was never simply a story about ownership. It was a story about legacy. It was about who shapes the future of royal history and who decides which symbols of that history are preserved. The deeper commentators explored the mystery, the clearer it became that the estate represented something far larger than land, wealth, or inheritance. But the controversy wasn't simply about land, it was about what that estate symbolized within the monarchy. As the story gained attention, royal historians focused on the estate itself. Far more than a valuable property, it was viewed as a symbol of continuity, tradition, and royal identity. Generations of royals had reportedly treated it as a sanctuary tied to the crown's deeper legacy. That historical significance would soon become central to understanding why the estate allegedly remained out of reach. The deeper commentators explored the controversy, the clearer it became that the estate occupied a unique place within royal history. This was not simply another property sitting within an extensive portfolio of royal residencies and holdings. According to historians and palace observers, the estate had long been regarded as something far more meaningful. It represented permanence in a world of constant change, a physical reminder of traditions that had survived wars, political upheavals, family crises, and generations of transition. That reputation alone elevated the controversy beyond the level of an ordinary inheritance story. As researchers revisited the estate's history, they uncovered a pattern that appeared repeatedly throughout royal tradition. Certain properties were never viewed purely through a financial lens. Their value came from what they represented. Over time, these estates became associated with service, duty, and continuity. They served as symbols of stability during uncertain times and often carried emotional significance that extended across multiple generations. According to many observers, the estate at the center of this controversy belonged firmly within that category. Royal historians were particularly interested in the property's connection to the broader heritage of the monarchy. Reports suggested that previous generations had treated it almost as a sanctuary, a place tied not merely to family life, but to the institution itself. The estate's reputation had been shaped over decades by the people who occupied it and the traditions they preserved there. Every chapter of its history appeared to add another layer of symbolic importance, reinforcing the perception that it was part of something larger than private ownership. That symbolism quickly became the focal point of public discussion. Media coverage expanded as commentators attempted to explain why the estate mattered so much. For many people outside royal circles, the controversy initially appeared difficult to understand. Why would one property generate such intense fascination? Yet the answer became increasingly clear as historians explained the role symbolic estates play within royal culture. They are not simply assets, they are vessels of memory carrying stories, values, and institutional identity from one generation to the next. As those explanations gained attention, questions about stewardship began emerging. Who should ultimately be responsible for preserving such a place? Should historically significant estates remain tied to long-established traditions, or should their future evolve alongside the changing monarchy? Those debates extended far beyond the immediate controversy and touched upon larger questions regarding the future direction of royal inheritance itself. The more observers learned about the estate, the more they understood why reports of the Queen Mother's alleged decision continued attracting attention years later. If the property truly carried the symbolic importance many commentators described, then decisions regarding its future would inevitably involve considerations far more complex than personal preference or family expectation. The estate's history seemed to demand a different level of scrutiny. By this stage, public fascination was no longer centered solely on what had happened. It was increasingly focused on why it had happened. Understanding the significance of the estate changed everything. Once people grasped what it represented, they began looking far more closely at the assumptions, expectations, and ambitions that had reportedly surrounded it for years. And once the estate's significance became clear, attention quickly shifted toward the expectations surrounding it. According to royal commentators, the controversy centered on a long-standing expectation that allegedly developed behind palace walls. Reports suggest some believed the estate might eventually become available through shifting family circumstances. What seemed like a reasonable assumption to some observers reportedly became far more complicated once earlier decisions and hidden arrangements began resurfacing. As public interest intensified, attention gradually shifted away from the estate itself and toward the expectations that had allegedly surrounded it for years. According to various royal commentators, the controversy was fueled not by a single event, but by a belief that had quietly developed over time. Reports suggested that changing family dynamics, evolving royal roles, and shifting circumstances may have led some observers to assume that the estate could eventually become available through future arrangements. Whether those assumptions were ever formally justified remains unclear, but their existence became a major focus of discussion. What made the story especially compelling was the uncertainty surrounding its origins. Different interpretations quickly emerged. Some palace observers suggested that any expectations regarding the estate were little more than speculation fueled by rumor and palace gossip. Others believed there may have been genuine reasons why certain individuals thought the property's future remained open to negotiation. The absence of official confirmation ensured that neither perspective could be conclusively proven, allowing the mystery to grow larger with every passing year. As those competing narratives circulated, questions about timing became increasingly important. Why did reports of these alleged expectations continue resurfacing long after the original decisions had reportedly been made? Why were commentators suddenly revisiting conversations and arrangements that many assumed had been settled decades earlier? Those questions encouraged royal historians to look deeper into the chronology surrounding the estate and the decisions connected to. The deeper they looked, the more historical details appeared to emerge. Commentators began re-examining old accounts, family arrangements, and long-forgotten palace stories that had once seemed insignificant. What initially appeared to be a straightforward inheritance discussion gradually evolved into something far more intricate. Every newly uncovered detail seemed to point toward earlier decisions that may have quietly shaped the estate's future long before public attention ever focused on it. Public fascination grew rapidly because the story contained all the elements that make royal mysteries so enduring. There was history, there was symbolism, there were competing interpretations and unanswered questions. Most importantly, there was the suggestion that important decisions may have been made long before anyone realized their significance. That possibility transformed the controversy from a discussion about future ownership into an investigation of choices made in the distant past. The contrast at the center of the story became increasingly striking. On one side stood reported expectations that may have developed gradually, through circumstance and assumption. On the other stood the possibility that those expectations had never been realistic because the estate's future had already been quietly determined years earlier. If that were true, then the real turning point in the story did not occur when the expectations emerged. It occurred when a far more influential figure allegedly acted to shape the estate's destiny. By this stage, many royal observers had reached the same conclusion. The reported expectations, however fascinating, were ultimately secondary. The deeper mystery involved the decisions that allegedly predated them. As commentators continued revisiting old records and forgotten palace accounts, attention increasingly focused on one individual whose influence appeared to stretch far beyond her lifetime. Yet the expectation itself was only half the story. The Queen Mother's reported intervention would prove far more consequential. What happened next remains one of the most debated elements of the entire narrative. According to various accounts, the Queen Mother reportedly ensured the estate would follow a very different path. No public confrontation followed. No dramatic announcement was made. Yet many observers believe her decision reflected a deliberate effort to safeguard a particular royal legacy for future generations. As commentators dug deeper into the controversy, attention increasingly shifted away from reported expectations and toward the woman many believed had quietly shaped the estate's destiny long before questions about its future ever emerged. The Queen Mother occupied a unique position within royal history. She was not merely a senior royal figure. She was widely regarded as a guardian of continuity, someone who understood the delicate balance between family interests and institutional preservation better than almost anyone else of her generation. That reputation made the reported decision surrounding the estate especially significant. According to various accounts, the Queen Mother allegedly took steps that ensured the property would follow a very different path from the one some observers later anticipated. What makes the story so compelling is the manner in which it reportedly unfolded. There were no public disagreements, no dramatic statements, no visible conflict that could be captured in headlines. Instead, if the reports are accurate, the decision was made quietly and deliberately, hidden beneath the ordinary workings of royal administration. Yet its consequences would continue echoing years later. Royal commentators have long debated the reasoning behind such a move. Some argue that the Queen Mother may have viewed the estate as an asset too symbolically important to be influenced by changing personal circumstances. Others believe she was guided by a broader vision of royal stewardship, one that prioritized continuity over convenience. Whatever the explanation, many observers agree on one point. The decision appears to have reflected a long-term strategy rather than a short-term response. Historical precedents soon became part of the discussion. Throughout royal history, influential figures have often taken steps to protect significant properties, collections, and institutions from uncertainty. These actions were rarely designed to benefit a single individual. Instead, They were intended to safeguard legacies that extended beyond any one generation. As historians revisited those examples, they began drawing parallels between earlier acts of royal stewardship and the reported intervention attributed to the Queen Mother. The controversy also reignited a larger conversation about responsibility. Who should ultimately determine the future of historically significant royal assets? Should such decisions be guided by personal relationships, family expectations, or institutional priorities? Those questions transformed the story into something much more profound than an inheritance debate. It became an examination of how royal history is preserved and who carries the authority to shape that preservation. Media interest intensified as every new interpretation added another layer of intrigue. Supporters of the reported decision argued that it demonstrated remarkable foresight. Critics questioned whether such choices inevitably create future misunderstandings. Yet regardless of where opinions fell, the Queen Mother's influence remained impossible to ignore. Even years after her passing, her reported actions continued shaping discussions about royal property, legacy, and succession. The more observers analysed the story, the clearer one reality became. If the Queen Mother truly intervened as reports suggest, then her decision was never solely about an estate. It was about protecting a vision of continuity that she believed should survive long after her own era had ended. That possibility gave the controversy a dramatic significance far beyond ownership or inheritance. But the reported decision raised an even larger question about who the estate was ultimately intended to benefit. As discussions continued, commentators noticed the debate repeatedly returned to one powerful theme: legacy. The estate increasingly came to represent more than property ownership. To many observers, it symbolized the preservation of royal history and the careful management of future succession. That emotional connection transformed the controversy into something much larger than a simple inheritance dispute. The deeper the public examined the story, the more it seemed to touch upon questions that have shaped monarchies for centuries. Who inherits responsibility for preserving the institution's most important symbols? Who decides which traditions survive and which are allowed to evolve? What initially appeared to be a disagreement over a historic estate gradually became a broader conversation about legacy itself. For many royal observers, the property was no longer viewed as a valuable asset. It had become a symbol of continuity, a bridge connecting the monarchy's past to its future. That emotional dimension fueled growing public fascination. Commentators frequently pointed to the powerful role legacy plays within royal life. Unlike ordinary inheritances, royal estates often carry generations of history, sacrifice, and institutional memory. They become associated with specific eras, influential figures, and defining moments as a result. Decisions involving such properties rarely remain private family matters. They inevitably become part of a much larger discussion about what the monarchy chooses to preserve and why. At the same time, another debate began dominating royal discussions. Royal estates have never functioned like ordinary family properties. For generations, they have existed within a complex framework of tradition, duty, and institutional responsibility. Historians noted that many significant royal assets were never intended to serve purely personal interests. Instead, they were viewed as resources held in trust for future generations. That perspective dramatically changed the way many people interpreted the controversy. Questions about stewardship soon moved to the forefront. Who should control historically significant royal assets? Should personal expectations ever outweigh institutional priorities? And how should decisions be made when a property carries immense symbolic importance? Those questions sparked intense debate among royal commentators, many of whom argued that the controversy reflected broader tensions between private ambition and public responsibility. Historical examples were frequently cited as observers revisited earlier moments when influential royals made difficult decisions to protect estates, collections, and traditions for the long term. In many cases, those choices proved controversial at the time, but were later viewed as efforts to safeguard continuity. The parallels only deepened public interest. Suddenly, the story seemed less about one estate and more about the enduring struggle to balance change with preservation. The contrast at the center of the controversy became increasingly compelling. On one side stood expectations shaped by circumstance and evolving family dynamics. On the other stood centuries of royal tradition, emphasizing stewardship, continuity, and institutional responsibility. Both perspectives carried emotional weight, both inspired passionate debate. Yet together, they revealed something much larger than the original controversy itself. As discussions expanded across Britain and beyond, many observers began viewing the estate as a symbol of a broader challenge facing the modern monarchy. How can an institution adapt to changing times while protecting the traditions that define it? That question transformed the story from a royal inheritance mystery into a powerful reflection on the future of the crown itself. And as those discussions expanded, many began viewing the controversy as part of a much larger struggle over royal inheritance. For years, royal observers have debated whether personal expectations should ever outweigh institutional priorities. The estate controversy appeared to bring that question into sharp focus. Discussions about entitlement, duty, and royal responsibility suddenly dominated the narrative. What began as a reported inheritance disagreement had evolved into a broader examination of how the monarchy protects its most valuable legacies. As the controversy grew, many commentators concluded that the story was no longer about a single estate or a single issue. Instead, it had become a powerful reflection of one of the monarchy's oldest challenges, balancing individual hopes with institutional responsibility. Throughout royal history, personal desires have often collided with the demands of tradition. In many cases, those moments reveal the true priorities of the crown. That is precisely why this reported dispute captured so much attention. It seemed to place the monarchy's guiding principles under a spotlight. Observers increasingly debated whether personal expectations should ever influence assets viewed as symbols of royal continuity. Some argued that changing times require greater flexibility. Others maintained that certain estates, traditions, and institutions exist for a purpose far greater than any one generation. That debate touched on questions of duty, stewardship, and leadership that have shaped royal history for centuries. What made the story so compelling was that there appeared to be no easy answer. Historical comparisons soon emerged. Commentators revisited earlier moments when influential royals were forced to choose between personal preference and institutional stability. Again and again, history seemed to demonstrate the same lesson. The monarchy survives not because every individual receives what they hope for, but because certain traditions are preserved even when doing so proves difficult. That perspective led many observers to view the reported actions of the Queen Mother through an entirely different lens. Long after the reports emerged and speculation began fading, one idea continued resonating throughout royal circles. A reported disagreement over a royal estate had unexpectedly become a discussion about legacy, stewardship, and the enduring power of royal tradition. Whether viewed as an inheritance matter, a family dispute, or something more significant, the episode appeared to reveal how seriously the monarchy protects the symbols that define its future. The Queen Mother's influence remained central to that conversation, reinforcing her reputation as a figure who consistently prioritized continuity above short-term considerations. Public reaction across Britain and beyond reflected a broader fascination with the preservation of royal history. The controversy encouraged people to think not only about who inherits royal assets, but why those assets matter in the first place. Estates, like jewels and titles, are often seen as symbols of something larger than ownership. They become linked to duty, memory, and responsibility. Their true significance lies not in what they are worth, but in what they represent. Perhaps that's the message many believed the story ultimately delivered. Royal legacies are not preserved by accident. They endure because generations of custodians make difficult decisions designed to protect them. Whether those choices are celebrated or questioned, they shape the future of the institution for decades to come. Because, while estates may endure for centuries, their greatest value often lies in the history, duty, and legacy they are entrusted to preserve. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.